Each artist is going to talk a little bit about their effects for about 10 minutes each. Then we're going to have a question and answer period after that. So hold your questions until the end. Larry McRae is right now jamming on the pool deck. He's supposed to be right here. Anyway, he's coming. We'll put him last, and we'll get this thing going right now. Far end, we have Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Nick Shumlin, and Anna Popovich. All right, let's get started. Okay?
Ready? Yeah. Just go for it.
You're the man.
All right, we're just gonna go for it. Hey, I'm Kenny. I'm a guitar player. Does anybody know why they call these things pedals? Because you step on them and something happens. It's one of those funny questions that's like the answer is so obvious but nobody wants to raise their hand. So for me, I think we're supposed to talk about our sound and maybe why we choose what we choose and how we approach getting that sound. And actually for guitar players, it's this notorious never-ending search for the sound that you hear in your head. And you know, it began for me where it was just, you know, when I was a kid, my first amp actually was powered by Duracell D-cell batteries. It was a PV. It sounded horrible, but it was portable, so it was cool, so I could bring it with me wherever I went. Then I got my first tube amplifier, it was a Fender Twin reissue, and it kind of went from there. But I just want to start by saying two things. There's a common misconception that just because something is old and expensive, that means that it's awesome, and that's not true. I have played a lot of really old and really expensive guitars that, in my personal opinion, sounded and played horribly. I've played old guitars and amplifiers that also sounded amazing. And the same goes for the newer stuff. So it really is kind of like, you know, it's on an individual basis. You know, every instrument is different and unique, just like all of us. So, you know, when you find the right one, that's the right one. It doesn't matter what price tag is on it. It doesn't matter what year it was made. If it feels right, sounds right to you, then that's the right one for you. So anyways, I mean, I've always kind of, most of my heroes, the original electric blues players, you know, like B.B. King and Albert King and all those guys, well, they didn't have pedals at their disposal early on. So it was usually just a guitar and an amplifier. And I was talking to Tad Benoit last night. He was like, "You doing that thing, man?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You know, they asked me to come do it, but I don't use no pedals." And so you know, there's no reason for him to be here for that. So I have I have different pedal boards. I have about 3 different setups, and it totally depends on the set list and the travel situation. Those are the 2 real determining factors. So this is the one that I use when I'm flying. It's compact, it's lightweight, you can check it with the airlines, and they don't charge you overweight fees and things like that. It has pretty much everything that I need. Well, really all that I need is the guitar and the amp, but I have certain pedals on here that I have to have for particular songs. And so, like this Octavia pedal, I use it on one song the whole night, and that's Blue on Black, and that's it. But I can't do that song without that pedal, so just by the sheer fact that I do that song in the show, that pedal has to be on the board. The Univibe I use maybe twice, depending on the set list. Sometimes not at all. It just depends on which songs I put in the set list. The delay pedal, I might turn on maybe twice maximum. I used to never use them at all. There's some guys that use delay pedals all the time. They're always on. For me, I've never been a fan of that, so I only use it as an actual effect. I don't use it as a core part of my sound. So, you know, the delay, the Univibe, the Octavia, and even the wah pedal, I used it once so far in each show. So that's like over half the pedal board that doesn't even have to be there if I took a few songs out of the set list. Really, for me, I could get through any show or any jam with a guitar and the amp, and one of these two pedals, this King of Tone pedal or this Klon pedal. So anyways, I'll just kind of start at the beginning of my signal chain and let you guys know what I have and why I have it. So this is, we start with the wah pedal, and for those of you that don't play guitar, the wah pedal basically was invented to mimic the sound. You've seen all these horn players on the boat, and the trumpet guys like to pull out the plunger from the bathroom, which I always thought was kind of weird. And they use it to make that sound. Of all things, that the plunger was the thing to grab. And this was the guitarist's way of trying to mimic that sound. A guitar player decided, you know, somebody, I don't remember who the guy was that invented it, but that's what they were going for. So it's really to mimic that. So I have a bunch of different versions. Anna has one on her board that I like to use most of the time. But on this board, I think I'm just using, you know, the generic reissue of, you know, the Dunlop Crybaby wah pedal. It's definitely not my favorite version. I will say that in my experience, the vintage wah pedals with a certain circuit in them always sound better than the newer ones, in my experience. But this one is okay, gets the job done. And when you're putting a pedal board together, you also have to kind of experiment with where is the right place in the signal chain to put the pedal. Like the wah pedal seems to always sound its best being the very first thing that you plug into. And then everything else, if you want to put an overdrive or something on top of that, that works better than putting the overdrive first and then the wah pedal after it. For whatever reason, that gets you the best sound from the wah pedal. So I go from the wah pedal, then I have this other pedal that's called the Klon. So the real guitar geeks in the room will know what a Klon is. And this is a reissue. You can get these for about 300 bucks. And the original ones, which I have one at home, I bought two of them when they were brand new, and I think they're about 350 bucks brand new, and now they go for about $3,000. So this reissue is a very true to the original sound, and it's 300 bucks, and it'll get you the sound, and you don't have to drop $3,000 on an original one. But this is like, you know, heralded, there's a lot of hype around this pedal. It's supposed to be like, you know, the most amazing pedal. It has this thing, everybody talks about how transparent it is, and what that means is that when you turn it on, it's not going to, it's only supposed to enhance your tone. It's not supposed to like change the sound drastically of your instrument. And so it just gives you a little bit of a boost, and it has a lot of gain, which, you know, others would call distortion, that you can tap into if you want, but I try and just use it as a little bit of a clean boost, just to kind of take the signal up a notch, right, for fills or something like that. And then next in the chain after that, I have this pedal. It's called the King of Tone pedal, and this is an overdrive pedal by a guy called the Analog Man. He's a good friend of mine. I've worked with him for many, many years on pedals, and this one consistently, to me, if you sit around, you get your hands on every overdrive pedal that you can try and compare it to. For me, consistently, this one beats them all. And what it is it has two different circuits built into one box. It has two buttons. You can set them individually, so you can have one maybe that is a high gain and one that's a low gain setting. But it's like having two different pedals all in one box, and so you can stack that. You know, you can turn one of them on, and then you can put the other one on that'll just kick it up, you know, into overdrive. And that's a really nice sounding pedal, and it really has never let me down. So if I'm going to go jam with somebody, I'll bring this one. And what's cool about that is you never know when you're sitting in with somebody, you never know how loud they're going to be. And, you know, you don't want to be too loud, but you also want to have, like, you want to have the ammunition if you need it. Yeah. You know, so what'll happen is, you know, maybe I'll click on the first one, and, you know, I'll take my first solo, but then I realize, like, everybody's got their stuff turned up much louder, so I'll have the second stage set a little hotter, and that maybe will help me match the level of everybody else, you know. And then the next one I have is the chorus pedal. It's called the bi-chorus. It's the same concept. It has two circuits in one housing, one box, and two individual settings. And what that gives me the ability to do is to have a fast setting and a slow setting. And what I use it for is like, you know, well here, you can hear it. So this is just the guitar and the amp, right? And I try and use things very mildly, so this is with the slow speed on. That's off, that's on. But what I really like is that this thing gives it a real kind of organ sound to it, right? So this is the faster speed, and it makes it sound like your guitar is plugged into an organ. So that's what I use that for, and that's like on one song I'll use that as my solo sound. And that one sounds pretty good. I mean, if you don't want to lug an organ, a Leslie around with you, you know, just to have that one sound, you can have it in a little box here. So that's convenient. Then I have a delay pedal, like I said, I rarely use it, but you know, a lot of guys like to use dotted eighth notes. You know, for me, I have a song, this is a tap tempo, so you can set the tempo with your foot. So if you see a guitar player doing this, he's trying to get the tempo of the delay to go to the song, the tempo of the song. So I have a song that we did on the Laid On Down record where I used the delay as part of the rhythm track. So you know. So that's how I like to use it. Some guys use it like all the time, and it's going on underneath their soloing. And I think for me, it kind of like tends to muddy up the sound of the song. So I like to actually use it as an effect. And then the Octavia is what I have on. So that's the blue on black sound. It's an octave. It's like a distortion pedal. It's like a fuzz. It's a real hairy sounding thing. But what's cool about it is that it's an octave above the note that you're playing. So like if I'm actually playing, you know, the E here, then it is creating that one for me. And it's got a little bit of fuzz to it. But what really kicks it over the edge is like, you know, if you throw an overdrive on top of it, it makes it sound a lot better to me. This is like without it, right? I mean, that's an obvious difference in the sound. And it's a real weird pedal, so it's like, you know, Hendrix used it a lot. But, you know, I remember John Mayer came up to me one time and he said, man, he said, you're the guy that got an Octavia on mainstream radio. And he was like blown away by that because it was on Blue on Black and that song was such a big hit and people were playing, it was like a hit song with an Octavia sound, which he kind of felt personally that was an impossible thing to accomplish. And honestly, the record company wanted me to change the sound of the guitar solo when they went to radio with it, and I refused to do it. But I did. So the last thing, well, the last two things. So the next to the last thing in my signal chain is this thing called a Univibe. Now this is one that my actual guitar tech, my normal guitar tech, who's not with me on this cruise, he builds these all by hand, does them himself. But it's really a true to the original reproduction of the original Univibe. Like it has a light bulb in it and everything, which the originals had. The originals are notorious for being very fragile. They sound great, but you know, once they're broken, it's one of those things where it doesn't, you repair it, doesn't necessarily always sound the same. But it's another pedal that it's kind of like a sweeping sound, but it kind of has that kind of vibrato and Leslie kind of effect, sort of like a chorus, but it's completely its own unique thing. But the speed of the effect is determined by the speed of the light bulb flashing inside of it. So you can control that normally with a foot controller that looks like a wah pedal, and you push it down, and the further down you push it, the faster it goes, and you lift it up and it starts to slow down. But for me, in the live situation, I like things to be pretty reliable, and when you're dealing with the speed setting on something like that, it's really inconsistent. So I didn't build this where I can have 2 individual speed settings. I set it and forget it. So it's like dialed in every time, right to the right speed that I want. So this is the, I don't know if you can tell, here's playing. Here's with it on. Kind of hears, you know, it turns that, it's got that kind of wave to it, you know. And I have the fast setting here. And that's what I use on the rhythm part for Blue on Black. So I've got those dialed in. So this was custom built to my specifications, but that sound, they make a lot of different reissue versions of this pedal, but none of them really sound like the real thing, and this is the closest. And I actually have 2 of the originals, and one of them was allegedly owned by Jimi Hendrix, and this guy gave it to me. And it's one of those ones where it just, you know, when you hear it, you would believe that it actually was his Univibe because it sounds so good. But this is like the stuff you hear on the Star Spangled Banner. Jimi Hendrix playing Star Spangled Banner and that effect that he's got on his guitar. I mean, he had a Univibe, a wah pedal, and a fuzz face. That's and an Octavia. That was the extent of what was available back then. But, you know, he did an amazing amount of stuff with all of that. And the last thing I have is the tuner. Because everybody needs a tuner. Because you never know when something's going to happen on stage. So basically that's what I've got. And what I do, just to kind of summarize, I plug things in, I get a new pedal, especially when it comes to overdrive. What I like to do is I plug into the amp, I get the amp just on the verge of breaking up, right? I don't want the amp to be distorting to the point that I can't, because when you add a bunch of this stuff on top of that, you're going to oversaturate the sound. And you're going to lose the true nature of the instrument. So I get the amp, let's say the amp really breaks up on 10, so I'll dial it back to like 7, or like wherever it just starts to clean up, right? Because then I have a clean sound for my rhythm part if I want, and then I can add this stuff as I feel necessary. And I do the same thing for each one of the knobs on these pedals. I go through the full range of what each one of them does, and I try and find the point that I feel like it starts to improve the sound in a positive way, but it's not detracting from the natural sound of the guitar. And then I leave it right there, and I put a mark on it, and I move on to the next knob. And I do that for every one of the pedals, and then, you know, we put marks on the pedals, and that's how I know what my settings are. So that's about it for me.
Hey cruisers, how y'all feeling out there today? How y'all doing, all right? Give it up, Kenny Shepherd, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, man, give it up. I love to play the guitar. I do, I always have. And I've had different rigs over the years. Lately, my new favorite rig that I have right now is a 64 Super and a 67 Super. And my 64 Super has ceramic speakers, and the 67 has Alnicos, which are square back magnets. They're different aluminum, nickel, cobalt, right? Is that right? For the cores of the magnets. And each one has a different sound. The ceramic one's a lot warmer, and the Alnico's a little chimier and brighter. And, you know, as Kenny said too, like, you know, finding the spot right where the amp breaks up and backing off a little bit to use the pedals is exactly what you're supposed to do when you have a nice rig. I like to push that level just a little more because I really don't use a lot of pedals. I did have if anybody knows what a GCX rig is a full pedal board with controller. You can mix and match pedals and have presets to do that. I was on tour with George Thorogood, and the rig just was breaking. It worked for 2 dates, and then like in the middle of the show, cut out. And it was just too much to handle. It was just way too much, you know. So my philosophy I've been working on now is I work really close with my amp tech, and I work really hard to get my amps as clean as possible, so quiet, because they're old tube circuits and they, they tend to buzz and stuff, There's a lot of effects pedals that they're getting back to engineering with what they call like military grade components. And what that means is that it can take a licking and keep on ticking. And some pedals over the years have gone to more of a circuit board, and they kind of, they're thin. Different circuits can really, when you have high quality components, they'll stand up and they just sound great. For me, I think the Fender amp is one of the best circuits ever out there. And for me right now, the Fender Super is my favorite amp because it's the only 2 ohm amp I think Fender made. I think it's their only 2 ohm amp. And it's got a real nice punch to it. But for me, I really want to just celebrate the sound of that high reverb. Yeah. So I got one pedal on my pedal board. I got one, and my buddy Albert Castillo gave it to me actually, and it's a pretty standard full tone, full drive, but it's got a 2-stage drive. But my main thing is to celebrate the sound of Fender amps as they were, and get them to break up just right. I get a lot of compliments on my tone, and really what it is just accenting what's already there just a little bit. So I'll use the full tone just to maybe, just to give a little extra volume punch. If I want that full-on hit, I got my boost really high on this, and But I much prefer, I do love playing with pedals. They're great, and I love I know every pedal for the most part on everybody's board here, and you guys have great setups. So, I won't talk. I'll let you talk about your.
You want to talk about my pedal board?
No, you're too. Yeah, right. No.
Go ahead.
That's what. This is a great setup there too. Those are really fun to put those two together. Other than that, I just want to say I love the sound of a clean amp too, but I like to break it up. Another pedal I like to use, of course, is the foot switch from the Fender amp, the vibrato, and the reverb, of course. But half the time they don't work, so right. So there you get it. But I'm so thankful to be asked to do this, and with that said, I just want to pass it off to Anna.
So can I have a question. Can we go with the questions now? Because I actually really haven't. I admire that, and I think it's fantastic. So, what happens like when you fly and you don't have your own amp? You depend, right? Even for me, like I got pedals that I can fall back on if the worst case scenario, like a crappy amp on a stage where you have 15 minutes changeover time.
Yep.
So, because then that amp is not nicely clean and it's not sometimes.
You're absolutely right.
So what is your?
My solution for that is I carry two. I have a clog as well, and I'll keep that in my bag.
Oh, okay.
But man, I'm telling you, you never know. Like,
You never know.
I've flown with guitars and checked them in hard, huge cases. I'm left-handed, and I show up to a festival and I get to land, and my guitar's not there.
Yeah.
So what do? You gotta find a left-handed guitar on the fly.
Yeah.
But your pedals don't show up. What do? I keep an extra one in my bag. Just that's it. But that's it though, and I got a couple, we have those clip-on tuners that we like to use. Those are handy if you lose your pedal board and you got a clip-on tuner. You don't want to take your pedal board out with you. You just got a little clip-on tuner. But yeah, pretty meat potatoes. But yeah, you need something, because sometimes the amps just sound horrible and you're expected to make your magic with nothing these times, so you do what you can.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, how about it for these guys? Wow. All right. I'm Anna. I'm so happy to be here. I hate talking pedals and amps. I just like to play. I'm not into gear unless they really put a gun to my head, which Roger really did. So, but yes.
He was like knocking on your door. Anna!
It was a phone call. Anyway, no, I'm joking. I'm happy to be here and share a few information. I mean, I don't have a huge variety of pedals. I have a few pedal boards as well. One that's waiting for me in Europe, and one here, and then I got a small one that I fly with when I need to just get to a place. This particular one is my American set. I keep changing, I keep adding stuff. People send me a lot of things to endorse. It's been like that for years, and most of them end up in Belgrade with my dad. He's got a huge pedal board of all my pedals that I don't use, and he's very happy with them. And you know what? He sounds great. They sound really good with Milton. However, I'm always looking for that. I got 2 tube screamers, 2 original ones, and I'm always looking for that real depth and that really greasy sound, and also the way it responds to your attack on the right hand. Basically, the original ones can do that, and lots of new pedals don't have that, in my opinion. I just can't get that. I can't get that excitement when I play live. There's been a lot of pedals that I would use in the studio, and most of the time I won't even use them in the studio that much, because they bring you stuff and they plug in all these pedals you never heard of or never played, and they really sound great in the studio. You might be surprised, and then sometimes tube screamers are just too distorted for what the song needs. So I don't necessarily need to do it. However, I tried the reissue ones, and there's just a huge difference. I can't imagine they even call them tube screamers. I mean, it's like you can't compare that tone. It's a totally different pedal in my case. So, in my opinion, I have 3 different amps that I use, and variety. I have a 66 blackface super reverb, and that one pairs great with tube screamers. I got a Bassman that as well pairs good, and then I have a Mesa. I played Mesa for many years. I still have my main amp in Europe is a Mark IV Mesa Boogie. That one really pairs good with MXR stuff, download distortion, super badass distortion that I have, and I combine it with tube screamer, or I have a few pedals that are different in Europe that I combined with California Tweed, Mesa Boogie amp, and Mark IV and Mark V. So, depending on an amp, I will use different pedals. Mark IV has a nice channel, orange channel, that to me sounds in between Fender and a Mesa Boogie, right? That's what I'm looking for. Sometimes just a Fender is just too predictable, and if you want a little more drive, a little more rock tone to it, I find that of all Mesa Boogie amps, Mark IV, they made that pretty bluesy. All the rest is really heavy. Heavy to me, associate me with heavy metal too much, and I don't like that sound or whatever. Bluesy, Mark IV. They don't make it anymore. Now they have that Mark V version that has a Mark IV in it. And that's a cool amp. I just received one. The orange distortion is going to give you a little more boost. The yellow channel is, it's just like Fender, it's basically really a nice version. It's a little different. And then, of course, the red channel is full-on distortion that you basically don't need pedals if you crank that up on a Mesa Boogie thing. So right here I basically like, well, as you noticed, I like pedals that they don't make no more. So right here, it's not a good example, but right here I have a Dunlop wah-wah. Sure, I can do that, yeah. Right here I have a Dunlop wah-wah that I'm using as well, and it's a wonderful pedal. I like box wah-wah very much in my other pedal board. It's a box one with a British flag, and I've been in love with that pedal ever since I tried one. They don't make it anymore, so wherever I find it in a music store, in a store, music equipment store, I buy one. And I even buy them broken. I like them that much. Why I buy them broken? Because the trick to that pedal is you only have to fix it once, and then it works forever. And that's basically the reason why they discontinued, I guess, because they break easily. They break only once, then I call Daddy. Daddy comes over, he fixes my pedal, and it's done, right? So, British flag, box wah. I got 2 tube screamers. I got a Chorus CE2 that I really like the most, and it's the, they don't make it anymore. It's the 2-button version. It's really pretty, you know. I really don't need anything else than that old school Chorus. I think it's pretty subtle, you know, you notice it, but it's not overwhelming. It's certainly not, I mean, I think it's old school, in my opinion. If you pair it with a delay, you know. That's something that I use in Tribe often, that combination. A song called Tribe. 2 buttons chorus. Then I got an analog delay, the Dunlop Sand, and that's a cool one. It doesn't take too much of your space. It doesn't have a tap on, unfortunately, because that would be a nice addition. I bet they made something like that, probably. You know, I got a reverb pedal that I use. Yeah, when you do like a basement, or you know, you can add that. Super badass distortion. That's something that I'm using mostly with the Mesa sound. I don't use it on the Super, but. The tube streamers, I usually use the overdrive all the way, and then the other 2 buttons are like 10 o'clock. Is this on? So to me, these distortions really react to the way how you know, how much pressure you have on the right hand. Together with this guitar, of course. Don't try that with another guitar. So this is my 64 Strat, and I'm in love with that guitar. You know, I'm not a collector. I got only a bunch of guitars, not a whole lot. I have a 57 reissue maple neck that I use. I got that from, you know, my parents when I turned 18, and it's been with me on every show ever since. Most of the shows, obviously. It's now in Europe, but I got a white version here. Also reissue 57. John Cruz did a little, you know, modification to some of the pickups, and I think there's his pickup on it, and there is a boost button that's not usual by the 57 reissues. And also, I'm working with John Cruz, who is a master builder at Fender, on my model, you know, guitar, which is fantastic. And he built, you know, the first replicas, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Muddy Waters. Actually, he came up with those relic Strats, you know, the beat-up versions. That was all his invention. So I'm very happy. We are working on it already, so that's going to be great. But as with pedals, I'm not a collector, so there's a lot of people send me guitars or want to build the guitars, and I'm just really happy with the 64. I think it's got a big depth. It kind of responds. It has a life of its own, this guitar, and you know, when I first got it, I think I had to spend a few months just trying to tame this guitar. You know, it was a wild guitar, and it's been lots of inspiration ever since. You know, that's my main guitar, so those pedals kind of work with my Strat. Yeah, I think I covered most of the stuff I wanted to say, unless you guys have some questions.
All right, my turn. I'd like to first of all say, how about for everybody that has presented their sound and their effects, I find it quite interesting myself to see what they're all using, because it's totally different from my concept. So I'm amazed, and I'm happy to see what everybody's doing. When I first come up and looked, I looked at my pedal board, I looked at Anna's, I looked at Russ Neplin's, and I looked at Kenny's, and everybody's, the good thing about playing guitar is that, to me, I look at it as cooking. I mean, you know, everybody got a different way of cooking, everybody use different spices, but the end result is all intended to be the same, something good. And the way we come about something good is so many different ways to get there. Nick and I have a very simple rig. I have 2 pedals on my board, he has 1. So, I mean, we compete on for the less, but I mean, yet and still, I think when it comes down to lead guitar, we all have a similar goal and intent, and that's to sound driven, to sound strong, but to not sound too oversaturated, to not have clarity. That's the main goal, is to have clarity, but you want to sound powerful and strong. So for me, I played Fender guitars for a long, long time, and you got to remember that, as one of the guys stated earlier, that I believe Kenny said, it's your preference, what feels good to you. So the first thing you have to first narrow down is your style, what your style is, and what is compatible for your style. And I know myself personally, I've been playing for over 40 years. And when I started out, I didn't know Jackrabbit from anything. You know, I didn't know anything about getting tones, and I'm still learning about it. But I have learned this much, that for my music, it doesn't require a whole lot of effects. I love effects, and I used to try to use them. But I'm still a working musician, very much so, and I work a lot of roadhouses yet in my career, and I don't travel with a guitar tech. So I have to have a foolproof situation, something that's simple, something that works every night, and not too many possibilities of failure. That's my concept in theory. So I've used a lot of drive pedals over the years. One of my favorite drive pedals, and I go for the ones, I try to be exemplary in helping cats who don't have a whole lot of dough to go out and spend and invest in a lot of money and equipment, but yet still, it's some lower line equipment. If you know which ones to choose and how to go about setting them, you can still have a good sound. So I buy, I'm not a boutique buyer, but I buy a lot of standard industry gear that a lot of cats use. So one of my favorite pedals is the Boss Blues Driver. I love the OCD, the white one. I love your full tone drive over here on your board. I was totally unfamiliar with Anna's Gray Box, the super badass, but I'm very familiar with the 808 drivers and stuff like that. That's like the holy grail for most blues guitars. Everybody got an 808, right? You know, stuff like that. But what I have also learned that I thought when I first started out, that when you hear like the screaming guitars, like what Kenny, what these guys all do, the first thing you think that, man, that's a distorted sound and it's cranking, and you get something, you want to turn all your pedals on 10 and there you got it. But it doesn't work like that. And in most cases, it seems like that less is more. Less is more. What I do, I start from 0. A lot of people, when you already know your EQ and you know your gear, you can just go and set your gear. But on unfamiliar gear, you want to start close to 0, at least 12 o'clock, what I say, you know, it's not anything taken away or not anything added, but just start at a 0 point. And then you start to add what you need. Okay, this is not bass enough, let me get a little bit of that. Too MIDI, let me take that out. Too bright, take it out, or not bright enough, let me boost it. But listen and trust your ears. Trust your ears to be your guide. You know, you're always your own best critic. If it don't sound good to you, how's it gonna sound good to anybody else? So, you know, let your conscience and your good mind be your guide. With that being said, like I said, me personally, just because a lot of the gear that I used to like to use is not around anymore, it's not very accessible. So when things become less accessible, you start to look for things to replace things that have the same familiarity that you're accustomed to. For me, this white OCD is a very standard industry pedal, but if you want creamy, it has a cut back button where that you can cut the signal back and turn it all the way over there, and you're in a real good, comfortable range, a real creamy, smooth sound. For me personally, I like to have a driven sound, but I think I probably play a little bit brighter, toward the brighter side of the EQ, but I want it to have body, and I don't want it to be too MIDI where it sounds nasally or to whether it sounds unpleasant to the ear. When you cut down on your hot side of your rig, you want it to sound strong, but you don't want to, you want it to be in a comfortable range. And that's why I choose what I choose, the OCD, and I have an old Rocktron. I have a Rocktron Sonic Glory. My favorite of the Rocktron obsolete pedals would be the Austin Gold. It would be a replacement for like Anna's 808 distortion, but they don't make them anymore. And I kept one on my board for about 15 years till the screws all fell out. It was time to go with something different, you know, so I'm changing up. But I have a very simple rig. I use 2 effects pedals. I have a wah-wah and a tone, and that's all I use. So, you know, with that being said, don't forget one thing, that we can all pass the same instrument, but I'm gonna sound like me, Anna's gonna sound like herself, Nick is gonna sound like Nick, and Kenny's gonna sound like Kenny. So really, it don't come down, having enhancement is great, but your sound come from here, come from your touch, your grip. And I don't care who it is, you know, B.B. King, there was only one B.B. King because he had that fat drop problem, you know, them fat fingers, them big hands. You know, for whatever, however you get it, you know, however you get it, whatever it takes for you to get what you got.
I think you're the only one that can get away with saying that.
Well, I got them too, so I mean, I didn't mean anything bad. They called me sausage finger. That used to be my name. So I mean, you know, but you know, honestly, a lot of your tone comes from your hand and the tension in your grip. So it's all good if that's what you like, but it all comes from here and it comes from right here.
Yeah.
So just be a little bit more diligent, dig in a little bit harder. And you know, if you want to experiment with things, but do it in small doses. Don't start out on 10. Always leave yourself a little bit of headroom to grow and to change up a little bit, you know. If it's too much, or if it's not enough, you can always add more. But if it's too much, know the difference and know the dial back.
Real quick, to his point about the sound being in here, I can't remember. I feel like it was Les Paul. Some of you probably heard this before, so if I'm wrong, correct me. It was Les Paul or was a country guy. I can't remember who it was, but it's a famous story about him being in the studio playing, and somebody comes up to him and says, "Man, that guitar sounds good." And he put the guitar down in the chair and he goes, "How's it sound now?" Chet Atkins, there you go. That sounds about right.
I asked Larry, since he's playing a Gibson-style Flying V, if he would play a little bit so you can hear kind of the difference between the Fenders.
The humbuck has just got a little bit more girth. It's not as pristine, not as clean, not as pretty sounding as the Fender guitar. And I think that maybe sometimes the guitar matches with personality. I ain't out here for good looks, but I'm trying to get my point across, and I want to be at least be an old man, but a strong old man. You know, as long as you're not a weakling, that's a good thing. And so the reason I stopped playing, I played Fender guitar forever, and what changed me from going to humbuck to Fender was that I did a European tour with the artist Gary Moore. And he was Mr. Gary Moore. He was a Gibson player. He played humbucks, and his sound was so huge. He had the hugest sound. I never, you know, I come straight from the club and went right to the big stage. I'm an ex-General Motors worker. I did that for about 14 years before I started to try to make a career in music. And when I left the bar, I went straight to the big stage, opening Gary Moore's sound, and we did our little set that night. We felt pretty good about it, but when he come on stage, it was like unleash the Kraken.
Yes.
You know, this big monster came in, man. I never heard a guitar sound like that.
Talk about his hands, man.
Well, it was not to do with hands, but it was equipment too, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The difference in the humbucker sound. So when I got home, I said, okay, I'm gonna get me a humbucker. I started out a lot in the city of Chicago, and when I started in Chicago, everybody had a Fender Strat or Gibson 335. I mean, all the players, everybody had a Strat or 335. You didn't even see a telly in them days. So when I got home, I said, well, I want to try a humbuck, but I didn't want to play a 335 because everybody else had one. So I got looking, thinking, and in my little local music store, hung a tobacco brown flying V guitar. Well, it just so happened Albert King was my absolute favorite, one of my favorites of all time. And nobody else wanted told me V at the time, so I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna be bold enough to pick up a V guitar. And I did it, and man, when I picked it up, I was telling, I don't know, last night we were talking, the reason I choose this one is because of the accessibility to the neck. I can reach all the way up here on my pickup, up here if I want to. So I love sometimes to play on the high registers, sometimes with a cutaway or something like that. You're not as accessible as you are with this guitar. But this guitar is not the most adaptable, not the most, not the choice of a lot of people. But either you love it or you hate it. And if you can ever come to the point that you can get comfortable with it, I think you'll love it. But, you know, it's apples and oranges, but it was different. And it was humbuck, and it's in between, to me, in my opinion, it's in between a Les Paul and a 335. It's that third choice in between, the same as, I think the other most unique Gibson guitar is the Firebird, with the many humbucks in it. You know, it's half Fender, half Gibson, right? Yeah, you know, so I just always look for some kind of way to be identified other than my size. So, you know, I chose a flying V guitar. And so, clean chord, now you play E. See, really not a whole lot of difference, but when you start to coloring, using pedals and stuff like that, you know, there's a noticeable difference between the humbuck and pickup.
See, I was gonna say too, when I first met Kenny, I still play a lot of Gibsons, man. You know, I was playing the Firebird, I think, when we first met.
335 too, didn't
And
you?
335, I got Les Paul, and I bought this guitar. It's a Japanese telly made in '92, and I bought it brand new when I was like 15. When I was a kid, and I didn't touch it for 10 years. I just had it because it was because I found a left-handed guitar at a music store, so I bought it. I didn't get to pick the color either. But man, I've got Les Paul frets put on it, the Lawler pickups, and a 4-way switch on it, and as Cliff knows, man, it's my go-to. This has been my guitar I've been playing like religiously for the last 2 years. But you know, I love Gibson too, man.
Yeah, I've got so I play some Les Pauls and stuff. There's like Les Pauls get that sound, and I mean there's the Strats. I have Strats that have humbuckers in it. It doesn't. You're not going to get that sound.
Not without the
from a Strat. You're not. It's like different wood, different weight, different scale length. A Les Paul neck length is actually the scale shorter than on a Strat. So you actually need to have, well, I mean, you know, you can do whatever you can do, but Les Paul necks are better generally for people with smaller hands because, you know, the length is shorter. But also, you just can't get that sound. So I have Les Pauls at 335. I got the Firebird. One of the coolest things about these guitars to me, I'm a car guy, right? So all these guitars and the colors that they painted them were all inspired by two things back in the day. It was the automotive world and it was the space age, right? So all those designs were influenced by cool cars, and then the cars were painted like they would see a cool color. The guitar company would say, oh, that's a cool color, so they paint their guitar the color of the automobile and vice versa. So, and what's awesome is that, like, I don't care who it is, there's probably, everybody comes out with a new, whoever has tried to come out with a new guitar design, just nobody has been able to break the mold. It's like these guitars are the ones that have stood the test of time, and it's like, you know, however many decades later, it's really hard to even come close to designing anything that's as cool as these things are. But the Firebird is an interesting instrument because it's supposed, you know, I got one because Johnny Winter played it. And then, you know, it's like, oh, it looks kind of like a Strat. But the thing about a Firebird, if you put a Stratocaster and a Firebird next to each other, the neck of the Firebird is like this. It starts here and ends down here. And so it is the most, it was god awful the first time I went from playing a Firebird on stage to a Strat, because I'm like, everything's here, and now all of a sudden I have to play it down here. It was the most disoriented feeling. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing, yeah, you just reminded me. So the reason, obviously, like he said, Albert King was one of his biggest influences, and, you know, as part of what drew him to the Flying V. I mean, you know, Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, you know, all the Strat players. I mean, the list is long. Same with Les Pauls. But, you know, I was drawn to the Strat first because my heroes, but also I just got so used. Everything it's like they designed this guitar perfectly for my style of playing, because the knobs are in the right place, this pickup selector's in the right place, and I can just effortlessly adjust things at any moment that I want to. And then I go and I pick up a Les Paul, which I love to play a Les Paul when I want that sound. I really enjoy it and I love it. But the problem is they put this up here on a Les Paul. And if you watch me play, especially when I'm playing rhythm, I have a wide stroke. And that's why my guitars get worn out up here. It's because the pick just wears it down, you know? And so I'll be playing, and then all of a sudden I'll just start playing, and bam, I switch pickups when I don't want to switch pickups. And it's the most frustrating thing, man, and for me, and that's one of the reasons why that kept me from playing Les Pauls for a long time, was because I felt like the design of the guitar is actually working against me.
Nothing bounces like a Strat. It's nothing balances like that instrument. I mean,
and the Firebird it's so light down here, and the neck is so long on the Firebird wants to do this.
dive all the time.
Yeah, you know, my dad had a Firebird, and that was the first Firebird I got, and it was a 1976 bicentennial Firebird, and it was a year, and they called it was a reverse body style. So when he played it, it would flop on him. He was right-handed. So he passed away in 2000. I got the guitar, so I had it made lefty. So it's like a reverse, and it sits right there, and it doesn't go anywhere.
But one thing I would like to say before we move on, or before it's all said and done, that there's a great contrast between all of these instruments. But there's no, I learned, my guitar got broke on a gig one time when I was away in Europe. Some guys were handling the equipment and my guitar was standing, and instead of moving it, they didn't move it, and when they moved the gig, it fell to the side. When I opened the case, the headstock raised up out of the case like that. And my point being that it was my favorite instrument, that brown V I was telling you about, and what it taught me is to not, is that I play the guitar don't play me. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, okay, I had to take another unfamiliar instrument and go on and finish my tour. But it also taught me too that there's no partiality, to learn to use the instrument for what it has to offer. So therefore, I fell in love with Taylor, I fell back in love with Strat, Les Paul. I love all guitars. I'm a terrible man when it comes to guitars. I love and don't be partial. You know, okay, if this your favorite, that's your favorite. But don't miss out on something good. Oh, I play Gibson. I don't play those strings.
That's right.
No, I play.
They're all different, man. They're all
They're
different.
all different, but learn to use them for what they have to offer. Yeah.
Well, we have time for a few questions. If anybody has a burning question, the panel.
That's not a question. Oh, no, you get tricky out there.
This is probably a little off topic, but some performers use one guitar for the whole show, and some change guitar every song or every other song. Can you tell me why and what you get out of that?
Okay. Well, I can speak to part of that because I changed guitars, but like last night, well, I was having problems last night. Good Lord, man. I had something happen last night. It's never happened before in the history of my performing days, but that's a whole nother story. But for me, I changed guitars for 3 reasons. Tuning. So like some songs are in standard 440 tuning. Some songs we do a half step down. My whole first record was a half step down. Other records after that were 440, and then the previous 2 records have been part half step down, part 440. Then we have some songs I do with a drop D on the low E string, and instead of you guys having to sit there and listen, they go, wow, and try to tune it down, it's more enjoyable for you if I just grab a guitar and I kick off the song and it's already tuned for me. The other thing is every guitar sounds different, so you may want a certain sound on a certain song, even if you haven't changed tunings. I want a Les Paul. I want to let the set we're doing, I didn't bring it with me, but the set we're doing, I do a Les Paul for the first 3 songs because that's the right guitar for those 3 songs. I change guitars, same tuning, but I go to a Strat because then that's the right sound for the next one. And then visually, for me, it's a visual thing too because I've been creating for the past several years, trying to create with Fender guitars that have their own identity. And the fans learn about the guitars, they learn about the history of the instrument, they learn about they know this is the Crossroads Strat. And they get excited when they see that particular guitar come out on stage, the Orange Sparkle Strat. Billy Gibbons named that guitar Copper Boy, and everybody knows that guitar now. And so people get excited when they see that guitar. And so, you know, there's a lot of different reasons for it, for sure.
For me, it's basically the neck is the main reason. So if you have a maple neck, that is something that I'm using for all the instrumentals, slow songs, slow blues, few of the pop songs that kind of need that brighter thing. And the rosewood neck is great for slide, you know, great for rock stuff, blues, shuffles, whatever. It would just be primarily for me, the neck is the reason for changing guitars, yeah.
Somebody else? Yes.
I'm talking about your tone. On an environment like this where you're outdoors, different stages, how many sets of strings are you going through this week? Or how often are you changing a set of strings, and how do your strings affect your tone?
I've been changing my strings a lot, especially through I've been on tour for about a month before the cruise and down south, and you know, normally I can go two to three shows before changing strings, but the second I notice that they're starting to go a little bit, I always change them because it's really hard on your frets if you don't. You can really, you know, ruin a good set of frets not changing your strings right. But yeah, no, the seawater definitely, the sea air definitely has been affecting my strings. You know, I did a jam the other night. I changed the strings before the jam, and my strings were gone. Like they were gone the next day. So yeah, you gotta change them frequently. You know.
Yeah, I would say don't save money on the strings, right? I do it every 2-3 shows, I would think, and I love the sound of the new. Obviously, it sounds different.
And the same for me. I mean, you know, I about every third gig, you know, if you get 2 gigs out of a set of string, that's good if you're working all the time. You know, if you're working every night, if you get 2 gigs, change them. And I don't know what do you use, Kid? Your strings.
Ernie Ball.
Ernie Ball,
Yeah.
10 gauge.
No, I'm 11 through 58.
Really?
Yeah.
He got some strong hands. I graduated down to a 10 gauge. I'm using GHS polished nickel, burnished nickel. Yeah, yeah.
I have to say, I was the most happy after I heard I got a string endorsement. Isn't that like the nicest endorsement you can have?
What you using now?
I'm using DR, 10s, a set of 10s with the first 11.
Great, great, great.
I'm using 11s, but right before I switched to 11s 4 months ago, I bought 30 sets of 10s. So I went to the 11s and they sounded great. So now I'm back on 10. But as soon as I burn through these, I'm going right back to 11s.
So the string thing is, again, I mean, all of this is personal preference. It's what feels right, it sounds right to the player. One little trick that I do, because my wife and I, we have 6 children. So when I'm at home, I'm not sitting around playing guitar for hours and hours every day. And so I lose my calluses, and I play really pretty heavy strings. And so if I come back out on tour and I start playing, real hard with these heavy strings, and like I would get blisters underneath my fingers, and I have to like ice my hand in a bucket of ice after the show until the calluses build back up. So one trick that I've been doing recently to try and mitigate some of that is I'll use a set of 10s for the low strings, or for the higher strings. I'll do whatever the 10 gauge set is for
10,
the
13,
E, B,
17.
yeah, for the E, B, and G string, and then but I still use the heavier strings on the low, but especially on the low E, because for my playing, I hit really hard. And I have personally found that if I use any string gauge on my low E string that is lighter than a 58, when I hit it, it goes sharp.
Yeah.
And so that's why, it's not like it's a concept. I'm not using heavy strings to show off. I'm doing it because if I use anything else, especially on that low E string, you can watch it on a tuner. I can hit it and you'll just watch it go sharp, and then it'll settle back into pitch. And I can hear that when I play, and it drives me crazy. So I have to have that amount of tension on that thicker string just so that the note rings true. As far as changing strings for me, it depends on how often you change guitars. If you play one guitar all night long, when I used to play one guitar for the majority of the show, we would change strings every day. But if I'm rotating 3, 4, 5, 6 different guitars throughout a show, I can play 2 or 3 shows depending on the weather and how much I sweat and stuff like that before we change strings on the guitar.
All right, we've run out of time. Let's give a big hand. Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Mike Popovich, Larry McRae. We've still got like 3 nights of our music left, so make sure you go out and see them. I think all of you have more shows coming up. So look on the schedule. Look at the CD store for their music, and hopefully you'll have a much better appreciation their artistry with their guitars. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.